Well, this is a story about Stephen E. Jones, who's a physicist at Brigham Young University, and how he's examined the collapse speed of Building 7, which was the third building to fall that day. It was a 47-story steel frame building that was not hit by an airplane. It had fires in it, just on a few floors, and then at 5:20 that afternoon, it collapsed in its own footprint in 6.6 seconds. Now, if you threw a cannonball off the roof, 47 stories, it takes 6 seconds to hit the ground. So this whole idea that the building collapsed that quickly meant that all 24 of the core steel pillars failed simultaneously. This has never happened in a building, a steel frame building, ever because of fires. And his conclusion is the only way this could have happened is that military-grade thermite was used to bring the building down. Now, he doesn't speculate who put that in there or who did it. He just says the physics of this issue are quite clear. That the building did not fall down simply because of a fire, that it had to have had demolitions in it.
Did anyone pick up on this story, Dr. Phillips? Has anyone picked up on this to the point where they want to look at it further?
This is one that just completely gets negative. Either gets negative coverage or no coverage in the U.S. Any questioning of the official 9/11 Commission report is called a conspiracy theory, even though in this case the science is quite clear. Any questioning of the official 9/11 Commission report is called a conspiracy theory, even though in this case the science is quite clear. In fact, there are over 24 structural engineers, physicists, chemists on the 9/11 truth groups that say that he's correct. And then the Swiss Institute of Technology, two of the structural analyst professors there, Dr. Hugo Brockman and Jörg Schneider, have both said that they believe that Building 7 came down because of demolitions.
Now, Dr. Phillips, we're 5 years on from when the event actually happened. Why do you think this story took so long to come out?
Well, actually, it hasn't come out.
Oh, well, I mean, at least you have more evidence of it, yeah.
Exactly, and we picked this up a year and a half ago from Deseret News, which is the Salt Lake City newspaper, and Stephen Jones was at our conference. He gave a lecture. It's been published. It's out on the internet and that sort of thing, but he continually is just accused of being a conspiracy theorist without a really good scientific assessment of what he's saying. So it's a debate, and we think that the debate between the scientists needs to be covered as an important story in the U.S.
Now, in the 30 years you've been going, Dr. Phillips, have you ever had people, based on the book being published and these stories being highlighted as missed stories in your book, have you found they've been picked up and then followed up afterwards?
Oh, definitely. 1 out of 3 of the stories over the 30 years have gone on to get corporate media coverage.
Because of the publication, you feel?
Well, we'd like to think that, but that would be a big claim. But in some cases, that was clearly the case. With the plutonium on board the Cassini space shot, when we publicized that, and Dr. Carl Grossman was the person speaking about that issue, if the spacecraft had not successfully made the launch, it would have endangered a major part of Florida. That was picked up by 60 Minutes and aired right away, and they actually got that from our book. But we often don't know, but these stories are very important, and a lot of them do go on to get national coverage.
He's an architect experienced in steel structures. Now Richard Gage is touring the country with a controversial message about September 11th.
Richard Gage is here to show us why he's calling for a more thorough investigation into the collapse of the World Trade Center buildings. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here.
Well, first of all, give us a little bit more about your background.
Well, I'm an architect of 20 years, a member of the American Institute of Architects, and I've been studying steel-framed, fireproof buildings for about that long.
We asked that for clarification because as we get into this, we want people to make sure that you're not just somebody with a wacky idea.
Right.
Okay, you come with some science to you. What is the official reason for the collapse of the World Trade Center towers?
Well, we're told that the planes hit the buildings, and there was an explosion and a fire, and about an hour and a half later, in the case of the North Tower, the buildings collapsed due to structural weakening due to the fires. Mm-hmm. The problem is that we don't have large gradual deformations associated with collapses, and fires in high-rises have never brought down a steel frame high-rise building at all, ever. And what we have, unfortunately, is the evidence in the Twin Towers and the third skyscraper to collapse that day, which most people don't know anything about it. We have the evidence of the 10 key features of controlled demolition. In the case of Building 7, it collapses straight down into its own footprint at free fall speed in the first 100 feet. It's dropping, as you can see, symmetrically, smoothly, at free fall speed in the first 100 feet, 2.5 seconds. This is uncanny. There's 40,000 tons of structural steel designed to resist this collapse.
Is it, what, a 47-story building?
Yeah, it's just called Building 7, right a football field away from the Twin Towers.
Oh, okay, so what we're showing is left what happened. In fact, right is a controlled where you are using, or the people who made this happen, used demolition.
Indeed, and this is a direct comparison. And you can see that, indeed, almost free fall speed, free fall acceleration through 40,000 tons of structural steel. That is uncanny. So we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation as a result of this evidence and the evidence in the World Trade Center. That is very explosive. Almost every architect and engineer we show this information to agrees with us that these are controlled demolitions. If we can get them to look at the information, because obviously the implications of a controlled demolition are dark for our country, because that means somebody besides Al-Qaeda was involved, because these have to be easily 3 of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon.
Now, if that was a controlled demolition, would there not be any evidence at the ground level of explosives within the building
debris
itself, the debris that's left?
Indeed, and what we find down there is pools of molten iron.
What does that mean?
Several tons. Exactly. What is that doing there? The first responders see it, the structural engineers see it. It's documented by FEMA, the melting of steel. Normal office fires is what's supposed to have brought these buildings down, along with jet plane impacts. The jet fuel and office fires don't produce molten iron or molten steel. It doesn't begin to melt until 3,000 degrees. The jet fuel and office fires don't produce molten iron or molten steel. It doesn't begin to melt until 3,000 degrees. But what we have is the fires only produce maybe 1,600 degrees. So what produced all that molten iron? Well, it has in it the chemical evidence of a special incendiary, which is thermite, a high-tech incendiary used to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Indeed, in all of the dust throughout lower Manhattan, we have a 4 to 6 inch thick layer of this dust, and throughout it we have evidence of tiny spheres, billions of them, several tons of previously molten iron. Well, how does that happen? If you have molten iron, the byproduct of thermite is molten iron, and it's dispersed throughout all of this dust.
Now, you were allowed to go in and get samples and examine it?
Oh, there's plenty of dust. A lot of people have this dust, and 4 of these samples have been sent to physicist Stephen Jones, formerly of Brigham Young University. And they find in it not only these spheres, which others have found too, USGS, R.J. Lee, doing toxicological studies. These spheres have iron, aluminum, fluorine, manganese, very unusual elements associated only with thermite. And there's small chips of unignited thermite as well. This is very high-tech thermite, nanothermite. It's not found in a cave in Afghanistan. It's produced in very sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories. Well, what you have to ask is who had access to the buildings? Did Al-Qaeda have access to these highly secure buildings? Probably not. Did they have access to sophisticated nanothermite, where the particles are 1,000 times smaller than a human hair? Probably not. Somebody else has to be investigated, and that's why we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a real investigation. We don't have the whole theory as to how this happened, who did it, why. We just lay out the facts like we did last night in the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, and we demand a real investigation, and they'll find out who, why, how, etc.
Okay.
Yeah. We're talking about several tons of nanothermite and ordinary thermite. One would have to have access through security. So the security company involved for the World Trade Center should be thoroughly investigated. And it turns out to be Securicom, Stratosec. Somebody should look and see who's on the board of those companies. Some very interesting individuals turn out to be. In addition, one would have to have the cover of, say, an elevator modernization, which was, in fact, going on 9 months prior to 9/11, so that there were workers throughout the World Trade Center that had access to the hoistway, which is immediately adjacent to the core columns and beams in the building.
You're not trying to freak out the country, but you can't help but feel a little freaked out by this.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Yeah.
For this to happen,
On the heels of the anniversary of 9/11, architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth say the American public has been fed a storyline about what happened on 9/11/2001, when reportedly 19 al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial passenger jet airliners and crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, killing everyone on board and many others working in the buildings.
The official story is a lie. It's a fraud.
Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth say critically important evidence regarding the destruction of 3 World Trade Center towers has emerged, showing preset explosives were used in the demolition of the buildings.
There had to be explosives. There's no other way for the building to come down symmetrically straight down. Like a tree, if you cut into the tree, it falls to the side that you cut.
The Twin Towers suffered total destruction in 10 to 14 seconds in near free fall accelerations. Experts here say that can only occur as a result of preset demolition explosives.
Once we take the blinders off, we can see. There's very few people in America who have taken the blinders off. So we're assisting people by showing them the evidence.
The group also asserts that molten metal was found post the 9/11 inquiry.
Jet fuel and office fires cannot melt iron or steel. Jet fuel and office fires cannot melt iron or steel. They don't get even half as hot as that. Jet fuel and office fires cannot melt iron or steel. They don't get even half as hot as that. And so something else was there that's very energetic material that had to be placed throughout the buildings.
How could they be so bold as to pull the largest crime, the crime of the century, really, and expect to get away with it?
An explosion so hard that pushes upwards in the air, upwards. And it came out from below us, from the mechanical room that was right below us. And it was so loud and so powerful that all the walls cracked, the false ceiling fell on top of us, the sprinkler system got activated, and everybody started screaming so loud because they didn't know what was going on. And the first thing I'm going to say is that a generator just blew up on the B2 level, the level below me. And everybody's screaming. And when I'm going to verbalize it, 6 to 7 seconds after, we hear, "Bah!" The impact all the way on the top of the building of the plane. 2 different events separated by almost 7 seconds, separated by time. And now, I work in the building for 20 years. I know the difference of a sound coming from the top and one from the bottom.
He is a 9/11 survivor, the last person out of the World Trade Center North Tower. Well, on September 11th, William Rodriguez saved an estimated hundreds of people from the World Trade Center after putting his own life on the line. He then became trapped under the debris from the tower for hours before rescuers managed to free him from the rubble. And here with us now to share his really amazing story is William Rodriguez. William, is it William, Bill, which do you prefer?
Maria, for you is Willie. Maria, for you is Willie.
Thanks, Willie. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it. Why don't you tell me what happened on that dark day?
Well, basically, we are doing a presentation. It's a story of hope, expectation, motivation, and disposition of what the human spirit can do in a moment of despair. I worked in the building for 20 years. I was the person in charge of all the stairwells of the North Tower, and on 9/11 I had the only master key that opened the doors that rescue people. This is the master key, they call it the key of hope. And basically I was a janitor. Like I said, on that day there was an explosion on the basement, and this is prior to the building got hit by the plane, and then the plane hit, and then there was a series of explosions afterwards. And
Willie, have you met any of those people who you helped rescue, whose lives you saved?
Yes, I actually met so many of the people. There were many encounters done for national television. The thing is that most of those encounters were done for the Latino news, Univision Network International, Telemundo Network National, and they were basically shown all over the world but basically most of the stories, the big stories, were not actually presented to the national media here in the United States. The big stories were not actually presented to the national media here in the United States.
Well,
but yes, I have met them.
You just presented your story so incredibly. You've been to the White House 5 times. You've been honored by the president, President Bush. You've met Hillary Clinton. That must have been quite an honor for you.
It was an experience, definitely. And at that time, I was basically loaded to go into politics because they said this is the guy that we need to get the Latino vote. And I was playing the whole game of politics because I was doing the activism. And until the moment that I started to ask questions about what really happened on 9/11. And you may remember the whole thing about the 9/11 Commission to be formed, and basically became very active to get it basically started. And what a surprise, I was one of the persons that testified for the 9/11 Commission, and my testimony doesn't appear on the final report. What a surprise, I was one of the persons that testified for the 9/11 Commission, and my testimony doesn't appear on the final report.
Willie, I could talk to you until 11 o'clock tonight when we go off the air, but we unfortunately have to wrap it up. So will you be going into politics, or are you just here? I think people are maybe wondering, you're just here because you'd like to share your story.
Basically what I'm doing is telling the people what really happened on 9/11 because there's a lot of disinformation about what happened. Basically what I'm doing is telling the people what really happened on 9/11 because there's a lot of disinformation about what happened.